Is it working now? The classic had it on mute and didn't know. Week number 2. Okay, good to know. All right. We're going to be in 1 Timothy chapter 3 this morning. If you want to turn your Bibles there, we'll have it on the screen as well. But we're going to look back here once or twice and make sure we are following Paul's train of thought. And so if you want to have your Bibles open, then we'll make sure that you can follow along. So we often, I should probably get my Bible out as well. We often reference 1 Timothy chapter 3 there at the beginning because these are, if we're going to call them a list of qualifications, then we can call it that. We'll maybe talk about what we should call it here in a minute. But we go straight here because this is where this is what our elders, this is how we appoint elders. This is what they should be, what they should look like, the qualities that they should have. Here's a nice, tidy list that Paul gives us, and he gives us another one in Titus chapter 1. But I don't know if we often follow Paul's train of thought of what comes before it. At least I haven't until this study. And so if you'll read with me, we're going to start in verse 8 and make sure that we've got all of what leads up, well, at least starting from verse 8, these practical things that Paul's giving us that leads up to where we are in chapter 3, verse 1. Beginning in verse 8, Paul says, "Therefore, I want the men in every place to pray, lifting up holy hands without wrath and dissension. Likewise, I want women to adorn themselves with proper clothing, modestly and discreetly, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly garments, but rather by means of good works, as is proper for women making a claim to godliness. A woman must quietly receive instruction with entire submissiveness. But I do not allow a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man, but to remain quiet. For it was Adam who was first created, and then Eve. And it was not Adam who was deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. But women will be preserved through the bearing of children if they continue in faith and love and sanctity with self-restraint. It is a trustworthy statement. If any man aspires to the office of overseer, it is a fine work he desires to do." And then you get into, this is what an overseer looks like. Okay, so question for you. Starting in verse 8 and reading forward, what seems to be Paul's train of thought? And how does this section that we're about to get on elders fit in to what we've just read? Any thoughts? Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, exactly. So I think Ms. Nell hit it on the head that Paul's kind of giving us multiple instructions here. We got men, this is how you should pray. Women, this is how you shouldn't dress, how you should adorn yourselves, what you should care about. Women, this is not what I desire for you to do, despite what culture may be saying. This is how you will be saved. Now, if you do, for the men who are going to lead, this is what you should look like. Remember, Paul is, and we're going to talk about this again here in a minute, but Paul is going through, this is what the household of God looks like. This is the design for it. And so what he's doing here is kind of giving some, this is what you are and are not to be doing and looking like and whatnot. So I want to make sure that we're following Paul's train of thought as we're going through, because it's good to constantly kind of be looking back. We're taking little sections at a time here from week to week, and we got 6 days in between each of these studies. It's easy to forget what Paul's been talking about. So it's good for us to keep going, because oftentimes Paul's forming an argument that you really got to start at the beginning to see this is what he's doing here, to get the full effect here. So all right, verse 1. We just read it. Chapter 3, verse 1. It is a trustworthy statement. If any man aspires to the office of overseer, it is a fine work he desires to do. So before the list that Paul provides, he's going to give what may literally be translated, or he's going to say, the word is faithful, or the word is trustworthy. And some people aren't sure if this is referring to what has just come before or what's about to be read, the phrase before or the phrase after. Like when we're looking at like how Paul would have written it, it's just, there's no like spaces and capital and lowercase. It's just like a string of capital letters over and over and over, no spaces. And so it's kind of hard to tell like which one is being referred to. And so I feel like that's at least something to note in that if he's talking about, it's a trustworthy statement that women will be saved through childbearing. And we talked about that last week and what that can mean. I don't want to rehash it. But it's a trustworthy statement that this is true. Or he could be saying it's a trustworthy statement, it's faithful, that if a man desires to take the office of overseer, this is what he needs to be doing. And this is a trustworthy, a faithful statement. So, just something to ponder, I guess. He says, if any man aspires to do the office of an overseer, it is a fine work he desires to do. Now, this fine work, or yours might even say good work, is similar to, it might call to mind, chapter 2, verse 10. When he says, women, in verse 9, don't adorn yourselves with these fine clothing and trying to call of this attention to yourself immodestly, but instead adorn yourselves with good works. Now that good works is a little bit of a different phrase, although it's translated pretty similarly, and it's kind of more referring to something more like theological, I guess, like good works that you're adorning yourself with. What we're talking about here with good works is like the work of an elder is good, tangible work. There are immediate things to do, boots on ground, and we're about to talk about what that is. And so both of them are important, but there's a little bit of a nuance in the phrases here, though they kind of look similar. Now, when we're talking about an office of an overseer, there's a few different titles for this office that we're talking about. You get overseer, and here and in Philippians chapter 1, verse 1, you get an elder in 1 Peter 5, 1 through 5. This is on the screen. And then you get this term in Ephesians 4:11 that's kind of weird for us to translate, but it's like shepherd teacher or pastor teacher. The idea is you're guiding the flock and teaching the flock. And so each of these names implies something a little bit different about the office. But when using overseer, Paul seems to be focusing on the function of the position. Function being oversight, obviously, in the name, and protection of the flock. And so as we go through these qualities, now we might talk about this or I might ask it a couple of times, but as we go through these qualities, be thinking, why would this be important for the person who aspires to the office of overseer to possess? Because of course, we can say, well, this is what the Bible says, and so this is what we're going to go by, and that's true. But it's also helpful for us to exercise, why is this important? Well, why would God tell Paul to put this in 1 Timothy? I mean, why is this so important for an elder to have? So, let's see. Okay, so before we discuss each of these items, I guess you can call it, on this list, we probably should talk about the list as a whole. So in the first century, if someone were to be taking a new job, it's similar to a job description. They'd call it a duty code. But this duty code would talk about like the person's moral values and religious values. They talk about their social values. And so there's a lot of different expectations at play in like a duty code. And so what Paul is kind of doing here is writing what would be similar to what they would know as a duty code. Like here's the expectations for the position, for the person who is going to perform this duty. So this is the expectations of an elder. And we typically call these qualifications of elders. And that's somewhat fair, since one who is appointed as an elder needs to fit this description or else they are unqualified. And so it's fair to say qualifications. However, we cannot think of qualifications as objective truths that are black and white. Why? Because a lot of these are pretty subjective. As we go through this list, you're going to notice that some of it is an objective, concrete qualification, husband of one wife, okay? But there are some of these that have to be recognized by someone else in you, like being above reproach, right? And that's kind of subjective. There is no like black and white, oh, you must be above reproach. That doesn't happen. Now, a man, that's pretty black and white, right? And so you'll see that as we go. But there's no way to quantify some of these subjective qualities. And because of this, what we're going to see is this list really points toward the reputation of the man. How do people see this man? Do they see this man to be gentle and respectable and not quarrelsome and things of that nature? So as we go through these qualities, I hope you'll have maybe a little bit better understanding of what I mean by that, but I think it will be pretty apparent. So let's start in verse 2. An overseer then must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, temperate, prudent, respectable, hospitable, able to teach. Now, I'm reading from the New American Standard, and so yours might say some different things. I'm going to try to note, there's a bunch of them up here. I'm going to try to note when maybe there's a few different little translations and what your Bible may say so we can all kind of be on the same page. Now, above reproach, it's also considered blameless, and the word is not exactly the same, but it's really commonly tied together. You can consider it blameless. Your translation might say that. What it's saying is nobody, this is what this means, nobody inside or outside of the church has a charge against this man openly. How can this be achieved is the question. How can one be blameless? Are we talking about perfection? And if someone does have an accusation held over them, whether before being an elder or during one's time in office, does that immediately make him unqualified? So, let me ask you, what does it mean to be blameless? What does that mean? Can anyone really be blameless? Right. And that is possible. Perfection is not possible. But nobody can lay a legitimate charge at your feet. And I think about Job, who was considered blameless by God, chapter 1, verse 1. And yet his friends blamed him for half the book. Were they real substantial accusations? No, Job didn't do those things. But God saw him as blameless, and yet he was still blamed. And so this word, I guess what I'm getting at is it can get a little muddy. Not the word itself, but how it looks, in real life. It means that you are seen without blame. Not that you've never been blamed, but that your current state is without blame. Nobody can lay an accusation, like Dean said, at your feet. So in the eyes of God, one who is blameless is only blameless because of God's forgiveness, right? And not because they're perfect. Think about Abraham. He was commanded to walk blamelessly in Genesis chapter 17, verse 1. He's considered a righteous man, but he certainly was not blameless his entire life, right? You think about David, who said that he was found blameless before God's sight in Psalm 18, verse 23, but he certainly wasn't blameless his entire life, right? In a similar way, an elder is not called to perfection, as in one wrongdoing, and then they are no longer fit, but to be a point where reproach is not held over their head. They are not held constantly in blame. Okay, so what if an elder is inappropriately accused? This can certainly cause issues, right? And I think this is why Paul tells Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 19, to not even entertain an accusation against an elder unless there are 2 or 3 witnesses, unless it's corroborated. So just because an elder is blamed does not mean his status as blameless is revoked. An example being Job, right? Job was without blame, though his friends said, well, you must have done something wrong, and blamed him the whole time. And so it's got to be verified and carefully considered. And I think that this is potentially the most important, if we're going to say that there is a most important quality, I think that this is probably it. Not because it in of itself is most important, but because it's an umbrella for all of it. This term is the umbrella term for everything else that comes through the list. Because if someone is being considered for the office of overseer, and 2 or more in the congregation note that this person is not free of the love of money, a qualification we'll see later, or a quality maybe that we'll see later. But in fact, this person is actually quite greedy. Well, then that's reproach. This man is not above reproach because 2 or more people have come forward and said, this person's pretty greedy. I don't know if he should be an elder. And whether true or not, it seems that makes you unqualified. That's reproach. 2 or more people have come forward and said that this elder does not fit the qualifications. The body sees reproach. And so therefore, according to this verse, and I think this is why this is the most important one, because it's an umbrella term, therefore you're unqualified. So it's worth noting that the description above reproach is not qualified by in the church. Like it's not saying you have to be above reproach with your brothers and sisters, though that is certainly true. This, I think, absolutely includes outside of the church. And let's add verse 7, though it's not on the screen. In verse 7, this is the end of the list for elders. He says, and he must have a good reputation with those outside the church, so that he will not fall under reproach and the snare of the devil. So I don't think this is saying you've got to be above reproach inside the church. Outside the church, you just got to have a good reputation. I don't think that's the case. What he's saying here is the person who is above reproach, the man who's above reproach, is both inside of the church and outside of the church blameless. He is a man of integrity in all places. And so, if the people you work with know you not to be a gentle, or maybe you are a quick-tempered person in the work environment, and it gets to those in the church, well, would that not be valid reproach that we've got multiple people from your workplace saying, hey, this guy, man, he's a hothead. Like, we see it all day. It's not just one person, but it's 2, 3, 4, 5 saying, hey, this guy, I've read your list of things here. I heard he's going to be an elder, but man, he's greedy, like really greedy. Well, is that reproach? Seems like it. So what does that tell us about the status of an elder? It means the elder's reputation needs to be blameless. In your dealings with people inside and outside of the church, business, etc., you've got to have integrity to uphold these qualities in all situations. You're the same man in every place. And this is a difficult task, but it's necessary for the role. How could one lead a congregation while also having a bad reputation involving multiple unsettled accusations? What would that say about the eldership that allowed it, or the flock that is being led by it? The reputation of the church is certainly tainted by those who know him in the world, if they know him to possess qualities that differ from this list, and yet he's still chosen. So the elders certainly represent, as we all do, but the elders, especially because they are leaders of the church, are representing the church to all. Okay, so we've got being above reproach. And I should add, before we continue going, that what we see in this list is not, this is just for our elders, if you're thinking about being an elder, but everybody else, your standards are a little lower. These are all things that we're striving for. Men and women, really. There's a couple of these, of course, that are kind of like husband of one wife. It's just a man thing. But just in general, Christians are striving to reach these descriptions. However, so I'm not saying that we are below the standard, but what I am saying is the men who do fit this bill, who do fill this description, these are the ones who are fit. Not everybody is going to fit this description as well. Okay, and so what we're looking for is these men are the examples. They are exemplary, for this is how we are to be acting. You know, in Hebrews chapter 13, when he says, remember your leaders, because they have gone on before you faithfully. And so model yourselves after them. And so what we get here in this list is we're all to be following and striving for these qualities, but these men who have attained the office or have been appointed to the office of overseer, these are the men who are doing it. And so we follow those men. Okay, so that was a side note. Verse 2, an overseer then must be above reproach, the husband of one wife. So included in these lists of qualities is the identity that the exemplary man is faithful to his wife. The culture, this is a culture that they're in, where marriage infidelity is very common. I would not say that we have escaped that culture today. It is in this way that he goes against the grain of the men of his culture. He stands out, and he stands strong in that he honors his wife, and he's faithful to her. Now, being faithful to one's wife is often correlated to the faithfulness, one's faithfulness to God in the eyes of God. Look at Hosea. Look at Malachi chapter 2, verses 14 through 16. This man's faithfulness to his wife is going to be a clear representation of his faithfulness to God. And it appears that God not only knows that man's faithfulness to his wife is important, but I think it's fair to note that it's also important that he has a wife. While this isn't the main focus of the text, I think the focus is on the fact that the man is faithful to his wife. Having a wife is necessary to fulfill the office at hand, it seems. The companionship, the comfort, and the wisdom received from the wife of an elder is absolutely necessary to do the job. So, this qualification disqualifies any form of polygamy, adultery. It disqualifies any form of like marriage, divorce, or remarriage. This is a question, or no, there is a question of whether or not this includes a man whose wife has died and so he remarries after his wife dies, and a man whose wife commits adultery and so he marries again. He's been faithful to one wife his entire life and he's never broken that covenant. This kind of man. There's a question of, is this man qualified? How do we handle these situations where we've got a man who's been faithful to his wife his entire life, whether his wife was faithful or not? Well, I think, one, each of these cases are sensitive. And they each involve a man who has been faithful to his wife. And each of these reasons are biblical reasons to remarry. And so there seem to be a couple of ways to answer this. Now, textually, we try to be as true to these qualifications as possible. Sure, husband of one wife could mean he's rightfully, faithfully married to one woman, though not his first wife. However, the text just says he's the husband of one wife, which could lead to the restriction that the man is currently married and has only been married to one woman, the wife of his youth, Malachi 2, verse 14 would say, though not talking about elders. Therefore, we typically interpret this passage really carefully. A man who has only been married once is still married to that woman and has been faithful to that woman all the way through. Now, practically, a man who possesses all of these qualities but is married to another woman, even in a right marriage, is likely not going to take the position with the understanding that some in the congregation might find this potentially obeying this interpretation, right? Would you be above reproach? We're going to go back to above reproach a lot because that's the umbrella term, right? If you've got some people in the congregation who say, hey, look, this guy's been, I understand that he is rightfully, faithfully married now, but he's been married twice. And that seems to be against what this passage says. Is that not reproach? We've got several people who are saying that, struggling with the idea that this man could be an elder and also maybe be disqualified based on this text. Is that reproach? I would think so. In which case, this kind of man who fits all these qualities, knowing that there's that many people who are struggling with this interpretation, he's probably okay with saying, you know what? It's not worth the division because he's peaceable, right? That's part of the qualities. Probably not worth it. And so, I will continue serving, but not as an overseer. And because this is the kind of man we're talking about, right? Okay. Next one. Husband of one wife. Temperate. Now, we're going to go a little faster through some of these. These are a little bit easier to get through. Temperate. It may be sober or vigilant. And this word typically refers to a lack of alcohol. But because that's directly mentioned in the next verse, then it's kind of assumed that this is really talking about a man who is balanced in thought and assessment. He maintains the ability to reason, and he is aware of what's happening around him. Okay, we've got prudent, which also could mean self-controlled. I think that might be a better term. And this term is often paired with what comes next, respectable, or yours might say modest. These descriptions are paired a lot in other writings in the first century, and they're qualities that are considered of really high regard, maybe the highest regard in their world. Now, these are expected of all believers, and I feel like we probably should say that a handful of times, that as we go through these, that these are not just for elders, though elders should feel these qualities, but these are things we're all striving for. But in chapter 2, verse 9, obviously, but then also in Titus chapter 2, verse 2, 4, 5, and 6. These are qualities we're all searching for here. But it is required for the position of leadership, for this position of leadership. This is a man who has control over his behaviors and over his impulses. And this includes personal self-control against sin, but it also includes self-control during difficult interactions and decision-making. And you can see how these would be so important in the office of overseer. Imagine having an overseer who was not self-controlled in interactions. The next one is hospitable. This was also a virtue in society and expected of all Christians. You get that in chapter 5, verse 10, Romans 12, 13, 1 Peter 4, 9. Overseers are to be the examples in this quality as they are in all qualities, and that should be something to remember as well, that our elders are examples of all of these. Our elders, our overseers, should be examples in this quality for the rest of the congregation. Many believers in the first century struggled economically because of the society that they lived in. Traveling the empire could be dangerous. So overseers, who typically had houses, it seems, were to be the ones who would show hospitality and be the example of that hospitality. Elders or overseers, I'm going to probably do that a lot because I typically say elders, but I'm trying to stick to what the text says. Overseers are to be able to teach. Now, this is the only quality in the list that is directly associated with the duty of an overseer. All the other ones are more about the man himself and the qualities that he possesses. But this one is about the duty. You've got to be able to teach, to carry out this duty. And everything else are qualities that Christian men should be striving for. This is a skill that elders, that shepherds must have to exhort the flock with sound teaching and correct what is false. Titus chapter 1, verse 9. This is a skill that I think is interesting when we apply it. If you're like me, you typically think of this quality being shown in a classroom or an auditorium. You get up in front of people, you teach a crowd of people, that is teaching. If you can't do that, then you can't be an elder. That is the typical immediate thought process in my mind, because this is, I don't know about you, but when I think of teaching, this is what I think of. And while I think this could be an element of it, I think most ministry happens in one-on-one settings, small settings. Have you ever been in a personal Bible study with someone with 100 other people all listening in the room? Probably not. And so I study the Bible to do lessons like this, okay? But I have mentors in my life, older men who teach me this is how you apply it in daily life. They don't have to take hours to study probably what I've already studied. They don't have to take hours to study the text to express to me some concept, because they show it to me either directly in word or in just how they live their lives as godly men. They show it to me in conversation and discussions about life, but they show it to me also in how they parent their children and how they treat their wife and how they handle their business. Teaching implies that one can teach another about the Bible and correct what is false if necessary. But I don't know if that's exclusive to this exact setting where I'm standing. And I think there's an example of that in Titus chapter 2. Older women teach the younger women. Older men teach the younger men to be self-controlled. I'm telling you, I don't think I've ever had an older man teach me, like, in a classroom, this is how to be self-controlled, and I thought, oh, okay, I got it. Ever. That's never happened. Older men teach me how to be self-controlled by having conversation with older men and being around older men and seeing this is how they live. I should probably follow that pattern because they're pretty self-controlled. They're doing this pretty good. That's how it happens. Okay, next one. Continuing the qualities here. Not addicted to wine or pugnacious, but gentle, peaceable, free from the love of money. We got not addicted to wine, or yours might say, not given to wine. And it is often paired with not pugnacious, or your text might say, not violent. Oh, sorry, it would be, or pugnacious. That's a bad word. Pugnacious or not violent, okay? And so the text says not violent. They just said, they didn't want to add another not, so they said pugnacious, which makes it way more confusing because I don't even know what that means. Now I do, but I used to not. Anyways, this pairing of words, drunkenness and violence, essentially, is often paired. Look at Titus chapter 1, verse 8, where Paul pairs the same ones. And is often paired because of the common understanding that excessive drinking, excessive alcohol, can so easily lead to violence, something we know about today. And while these are both separate qualifications, you don't need to be a drunkard, but you also don't need to be violent. The pairing, the frequent pairing, tells us these are probably associated together as well. And we're going to get the same thing with the next ones. Not addicted to wine or pugnacious, but gentle and peaceable. These qualities are often seen together as well, and they can easily encompass almost any virtue. To be gentle and peaceable, well, you've also got to be self-controlled. and sober-minded, right? Etc. But put a lot of these qualities in under that. Thinking about these qualities within the context of an overseer, you could see how this would be so crucial, especially in the supervision and leading of the flock. Being peaceable, not quarrelsome, heals the rifts that's caused by bitterness and anger. This is a man who promotes unity. And look, with the number of complaints that is received by eldership of almost anywhere, and the church is not besides that, or not included in that, then you can see how this would be such a crucial quality, how it would be so necessary. This man is gentle and peaceable. He also must be free from the love of money. Paul will talk about the danger of greed and what loving money can lead to later in this letter, 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 5 through 10. It's a quality of false teachers, he says, though it is frowned upon in the world around them, actually. This is not one, as opposed to maybe husband of one wife, this is not one that the world around them looks at. It's like, oh, nice, greedy. Like, that's good. They really prized generosity, though under their generosity was typically trying to raise themselves up. So I don't know if you could really call it generosity, but they did because they was giving lots of money and putting their names on things. So even the world around them valued generosity and being free from the love of money. Well, overseers are to be free from that enslavement that is caused from loving money, and instead be willing to give it to the needs of the church, just like members should, by the way. They can't love money. Okay. Verses 4 and 5. He must be one who manages his own household well. Qualification is much more than just a quality, right? But a product of a man who possesses all of the above qualities. If you possess all the above qualities, these are likely the product of that. Now, looking at this qualification practically, Paul says to Timothy that the man must manage, which is the same word that's used to describe leading the church in other places that I'll have on the screen in a moment. Leading or managing his own household first. Now, what the word household could have meant in their context includes probably much more than your wife and children, which is different for us, right? That's pretty much all that's in our household for the most part. Maybe you're taking care of parents or you're parenting other children or something like that. But for the most part, you've got your husband and wife and your children, and that's your household. Well, for them, household could include your servants if you've got them, your property, your business, your interests, business interests. It could include even maintaining maybe good relationship with clients. And so the general idea is, in regard to managing your household, is are you managing what is happening in and affecting your household well? All right, question. If household includes all these things for them, then why is there a focus on their children? That's an open question. Why is the children the product that we're focusing on here? Thank you. So Paul could have said, by inspiration, must be able to manage his own household well, keeping his servants, if he's got them, under control, because they're his, and if they rebel, that obviously is a sign that this man is not fit to lead. He could have said that, right? But he didn't. He chose children. Why? Well, I think Mr. Dean kind of hit the nail on the head there. Your children are going to know you best, and their decision to submit to you, when they're old enough to actually make that decision, then it speaks of how you've raised them. An elder does not force a child to obey. You know, there's an age where you don't really have the choice to submit to your father or not. You just have to. Like, do you want to eat? Okay, well, I'm going to submit to my father. And so there's a time, when I'm 5 or 6, I'm not sitting around, should I submit to my father today? No, that's not how this works. And so there reaches an age where you've got to decide, am I going to submit to my father or not? To my parents or not? And so Paul's qualification here is, you've got children who are choosing to submit to you. Now, and I guess this is what I was getting at. An elder doesn't force, you don't even have to say an elder, you should say a good father in general, but we're talking about overseers here. An overseer doesn't force a child to obey. He gains the respect of that child when he's old enough, or that she is old enough to respect, right? And we're going to go ahead and, we're not talking about 5 and 6-year-olds here. and so he gains the respect of that child so that the child desires to obey or to submit to their father, which sounds a lot like our relationship with God, right? God doesn't force us to obey, or wouldn't be real love and real submission. But because we love and submit to him, we follow him, not because he forces us to. So let's talk about some of these words. One is under control. Yours might say like in subjection to. Here, I'll put some of these notes on the screen, sorry. Yours might say in subjection to or submissive to. But under control, and this is not control as though the children, like we just said, are forced. Like, all right, I got you under my thumb. It's not that. It's control or subjection as children who have chosen to submit to their father. Now, this phrase with all dignity in verse 4 there at the very end. Now, this could refer to how the children see their father. They are submissive to their father with all dignity. I think, and this is what I should have put on the screen, Nate opinion here, N-O. I think that this is probably referring to, though, how the father has exercised authority over the child to keep the child submissive. Because the whole time we've been talking about the overseer, the character of the overseer, and what he does. And in this one, how he has managed his household, particularly his children. Oh dear. So, we're talking about how he parents. So I prefer the ladders. I think it's more consistent with the focus. Makes a little more sense while reading it. Now, historically, how long children remained in the household is certainly different than how it is in America today because of the difference in family structure and expectations. It would not be uncommon for multiple generations to live in the same house under the supervision or submission of the patriarch until he dies. And so a son may remain in his father's house until the father dies, and that's totally normal. You can pick an age, 30, 40, 50, I don't really know. But that would be a normal thing to do. Therefore, this command, it could be referring to children who are under the roof of their father. And even talking about for this context, the roof of their father, and even into their mid-adult years with a wife and children of their own, and they're still under the roof of their father. Now, this is foreign to us because our culture doesn't do things this way. But that could be how they understood it, without even a second thought, because that's how their households were. Now, because this code is so similar in Timothy to what we get also in Titus, it's necessary to look at how Titus describes this particular command. And in Titus chapter 1, verse 6, he says, having children who believe, not accused of dissipation or rebellion. Now, this, I think, clues us in on the fact that submissiveness to their children, submissiveness of the children to their father would also include the faith of their father. The focus of the text, then, is whether or not the father has been able to manage his household well. But Paul says that the clearest indication of that is the man's children. Why? Because we don't see the private life of a man within his household. But the children do. And they are going to be influenced the most by it. So what did they see? And did they choose to submit to their father and his faith? Well, in Titus, Paul clarifies that faithful children will not be accused of dissipation or rebellion. Dissipation or debauchery primarily points towards activity like sexual promiscuity and drunkenness, excessive use of money and food. And then rebellion, or maybe yours says insubordination in Titus chapter 1, verse 6, is uncontrolled living. It's an open and flagrant disregard for my father and his faith. And so the reputation of the father, especially in this culture, though this is still a present indication, is heavily dependent upon the behavior and submission of one's child or children. Is the man's household divided? Do his children not respect him? Does their faith oppose the faith of their father? Well, this sheds a very negative light on his ability to lead if these things are so, especially in that culture. And so it adds reproach to his name. Now, for a lot of these qualities or qualifications, we can assume we know pretty well why they are necessary. However, we don't really have to wonder with this quality because Paul gives us the exact reason in verse 5. If a man can't manage his own household well, he cannot be expected to successfully manage the household of God. So Paul's question expects a negative answer here in verse 5. He says, but if a man does not know how to manage his own household, will he take care of the church of God? The assumption that Paul is saying in that question is, no, he can't fill the role well. So this brings us back to one of the main reasons that Paul is writing. What is the design for the household of God? The order of it's got to be restored. And this brings the immediate household out of frame and the bigger theological picture of the household of God into the frame. And this is all the more strengthened by, I think, Paul's change of verb. I don't know if you noticed, but in verse 5, he says, if a man does not know how to manage his own household well, what we talked about in verse 4, how will he take care of the church of God? We're managing our households well so that we can care for the church of God. Caring for is almost like more of a fatherly role in a sense, just if we're looking at the difference of words. Someone who can really care for the church that God entrusts them with as leaders. So there's two main things that we learn about from our leaders from this qualification. One, overseers can manage his own household or community and meet the needs of those who rely on him. But also, the reputation of the church is reliant upon the church's leaders. And if his reputation is hurt because of rebellious, insubordinate, unfaithful children, that casts a negative light on the church. Okay, verse 6. Ooh, bell's about to ring. Verse 6. And not a new convert, so that he will not become conceited and fall into the condemnation incurred by the devil. Well, there's a pretty obvious reason for this, I think, and it is that a new convert might see being an overseer or elder as a promotion. As hey, I'm in charge now. When one who is prepared to be an elder is certainly not thinking, hey, I'm in charge now, but I have been entrusted to lead the church of God. And so therefore, I am all the more a servant. While they are leading us as our leaders and as our models and examples, they are still under the head, which is Christ. And so they are all the more servants with all the more responsibility in the church. Verse 7. And he must have a good reputation with those outside the church, so that he will not fall into the reproach and the snare of the devil. This man's got to be the same in and out. He's got to be the same in these walls as he is in his workplace, as he is in his home. And Paul's list covers all of these things. We're talking about a man who possesses all these qualities we've talked about, and he possesses them all the time wherever he is, wherever he goes. And that includes outside the church. And his reputation outside the church will precede him and will show that. Otherwise, fall into the reproach and the snare of the devil. He's so wrapped up in the world around him that he's different there, well, he's fallen into the snare of the devil. And this is not the man we're talking about. Okay, next week we'll talk about deacons, wives, and then we'll also hopefully get through the end of the chapter and maybe one day make it through this book. And so if you have any questions, please let me know.